Ever imagined yourself in the Philippines? You spot someone, they're in a military uniform, but something seems a little off. Could they be impersonating an officer? Or what if you found a coin and it felt, I don't know, weirdly light?
Hmm.
Is it possible that someone tampered with it? Today we're diving into Philippine criminal law, and you might be surprised by some of the offenses you never knew existed.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these laws, they give us a glimpse into the values and the priorities of Philippine society.
Yeah.
How they uphold order, how they look at respect for authority, and even have this unique take on morality.
Yeah, we're gonna be exploring excerpts from a Philippine criminal law textbook, specifically focusing on crimes against authority figures and then disruptions of public order,
Right.
acts against public interest, and get this, offenses against public morals.
You'll see how these laws are defined and
Oh.
what specific actions can actually get you into trouble. We'll even unpack some real-life scenarios from the text itself,
Oh, cool.
so you can see these offenses in action. Like, like what exactly defines a serious disturbance in public?
Yeah.
How is forging a document different from falsifying it?
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we'll even uncover situations where escaping prison might actually be legal.
That's right.
Oh, really?
For example, imagine there's a fire in a prison.
Oh, okay.
Escaping to save your life is considered justifiable,
Right.
but you have 48 hours to return.
48 hours.
Talk about a high-stakes deadline.
That's wild. Okay, so let's start with crimes against persons in authority.
Right.
The textbook calls them PA for short.
Okay.
But before we get into, specific crimes, who exactly are these protected individuals?
It's a broader group than you might think.
Oh, okay.
We're not just talking about these high-ranking officials.
Right.
Teachers, lawyers, even barangay leaders
Oh, wow.
are considered persons in authority.
The law aims to safeguard, those who are responsible for maintaining order and carrying out their public duties.
So my high school teachers had more power than I realized.
Perhaps.
Now, the text mentions two types of assault:
Okay.
direct assault and indirect assault.
Right.
Both depend on whether force or intimidation was used against the PA.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. You have to know that they're a PA for it to count.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not just about the action itself, but also the intent behind it.
Right.
Knowing that the person you're assaulting is a PA is crucial.
Okay.
Otherwise, it might be a completely different offense.
And get this, attacking a public officer who isn't actually a PA
Right.
is only considered a more serious crime if you specifically meant to disrespect their rank.
Right.
Kind of a strange loophole.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but I think it underscores how Philippine law really emphasizes respect for these symbols of authority, even if the individual themselves might not hold a position of power in that particular moment.
So even a symbolic uniform deserves respect.
Yeah.
The text also covers disobedience to summons issued by government bodies.
Right.
What kind of actions would fall under this?
It's a surprisingly wide range of behavior.
Oh.
Refusing to be sworn in,
Right.
withholding documents,
Okay.
or simply ignoring a summons can all lead to consequences.
It seems like cooperating with official proceedings is non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
Now, what about actively defying or disobeying a person in authority? That's going to be a serious offense, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Resistance and serious disobedience.
Okay.
And simple disobedience
Okay.
are two distinct offenses.
Okay.
Imagine you're arguing with a police officer issuing a lawful order. That's simple disobedience.
Okay.
But if you escalate to shoving or physically resisting arrest,
Right.
you've crossed the line into resistance and serious disobedience
Oh.
with potentially much harsher penalties.
So it's all about how far you take it.
That's right.
We've learned about these persons in authority and the consequences of challenging their authority.
Right.
Next, we'll delve into public disorders, crimes that disrupt the peace and order of society.
Imagine a rock being thrown into a calm pond
Okay.
and how it disrupts that tranquility.
Right.
Crimes categorized as public disorders
No.
are those that disrupt the peace, the collective sense of security and order within society.
Okay, I get the analogy. But
Yeah.
what specific actions are we talking about? What constitutes public disorder under Philippine law?
The textbook highlights 5 specific actions
Okay.
that can be punished under tumults and other disturbances of public order,
Okay.
legally known as Article 153.
Got it.
These include causing a serious disturbance in a public place, interrupting or disrupting meetings, inciting rebellion or uprising,
Okay.
and even, and this one might surprise you, burying someone executed by law with pomp and ceremony.
Hold on. Burying someone executed by law with fanfare.
Yeah.
That seems oddly specific.
It might seem unusual,
Yeah.
but consider the message it sends.
Okay.
This provision likely aims to prevent, the glorification of individuals who have committed serious crimes,
Right.
even after their death.
Okay.
It's about maintaining public order and preventing potential unrest or the incitement of further criminal activity.
So it's about preventing a martyr situation.
Exactly.
The textbook also mentions unlawful use of means of publication and unlawful utterances.
Right.
Or Article 154, that sounds like it covers a broad spectrum of actions.
It does. Think of it as regulating communication,
Okay.
whether it's through print, speech, or any other media that can lead to lawlessness or endanger public safety.
Right.
Interestingly, it doesn't even require actual public disorder to have happened.
Oh.
Simply the potential to cause harm is enough.
So even if your words don't directly lead to chaos, if they could potentially incite it, you're still in trouble.
That's right. That seems like a pretty low bar for legal action, wouldn't you say?
It does prioritize a proactive approach.
Right.
The emphasis is on preventing unrest,
Okay.
even if it means restricting certain forms of expression.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act between freedom of speech and maintaining public order.
It makes you think about, the trade-offs between individual liberties and societal stability.
For sure.
All right. Up next, we're looking into alarms and scandals, Article 155.
Okay.
This one sounds intriguing.
It definitely covers a colorful range of actions.
Okay.
Think about activities that, while not necessarily violent, are considered disruptive and offensive to public peace.
Give me some examples. What kind of behavior are we talking about?
Imagine someone discharging a firearm in a town,
Okay.
rowdy gatherings that disturb the peace of a neighborhood,
Right.
or even causing a scene while intoxicated.
Got it.
These all fall under alarms and scandals. Okay, I can see how those actions would disrupt the peace.
Yeah.
But what about something more subjective? Like what exactly constitutes a serious disturbance?
Right.
How are these laws applied in everyday situations? Isn't that a bit of a gray area?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of how these laws are interpreted and applied in real life.
Yeah.
What might be considered a minor annoyance to one person
Yeah.
could be a serious disruption to another.
Right.
Context is everything.
Right. Context matters.
Absolutely.
It sounds like determining what constitutes a serious disturbance could get tricky.
It absolutely can. And that's why understanding the nuances of these laws and how they function within Philippine society is so important.
Well, I'm hooked. Now we're gonna shift gears and explore crimes that go against public interest.
Okay.
Get ready for some surprising scenarios involving prison escapes
Right.
and some interesting legal loopholes.
Looking forward to it.
Now we're diving into crimes against public interest.
Okay.
I'm really curious about this section.
Yeah.
What kind of acts actually undermine the well-being of the entire community?
These are crimes that affect everyone, not just as a specific individual.
Right.
We'll start with something that you might not expect. Delivering prisoners from jail,
Oh, wow.
outlined in Article 156.
Okay.
This isn't simply a prisoner escaping on their own.
Right.
It specifically involves someone else helping them break free.
Okay.
And the consequences differ depending on whether the person helping is a public officer or just a regular citizen.
Wait, so a public officer could help a prisoner escape?
Yeah.
That seems completely backwards.
Imagine a corrupt guard who accepts a bribe to look the other way,
Right.
or even actively participates in the escape.
Okay.
Article 156 addresses that scenario.
Got it.
And as you might expect, the penalties for a public officer are much harsher than for someone without that authority, who might be driven by personal ties.
So there's a difference between being bribed and being, I don't know, emotionally manipulated or something.
Right.
What if a guard is just negligent? Like they let a prisoner escape, but they're not actively involved?
Mm-hmm.
Is that still a crime?
You're picking up on the nuances of the law.
Okay.
Yes, that's covered under infidelity in the custody of prisoners.
Okay.
Both public officers and regular citizens can be charged with this.
Okay.
But the key difference is intent.
Right.
Was the escape facilitated intentionally,
Right.
or was it due to negligence
Right.
or a failure to uphold their duty?
So it comes down to like deliberate action versus, I don't know, a lapse in responsibility. Okay, that makes sense. We've talked about helping someone escape.
Right.
But what about the prisoners themselves who break free? Like what are the consequences for them?
Article 157, evasion of service of sentence,
Yeah.
covers that situation.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Oh,
If you're a convict serving time and you escape,
right.
you're committing a new crime.
That seems pretty obvious, but but what about extreme situations?
Yeah.
Like what if a fire breaks out in the prison
Okay.
and a prisoner escapes to save their own life? Would they still be penalized?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Article 158
Okay.
addresses those kinds of scenarios.
Okay.
It's called evasion of service of sentence on the occasion of disorders.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is.
Okay.
And it basically says if a prisoner escapes during a fire, an earthquake, or other similar disaster, it's legal to do so,
Okay.
but they must return within 48 hours.
So it's like a temporary get out of jail free card during emergencies?
Yeah, you could say that.
But wouldn't that create chaos?
Right.
Imagine like hundreds of prisoners running loose during a natural disaster.
Right.
How does the law like address the potential risks?
It highlights a fascinating dilemma.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the imperative to maintain order and security.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the fundamental human right to self-preservation
Right.
in the face of imminent danger.
Okay.
Article 158 attempts to balance these competing interests
Okay.
by providing this narrow exception for emergencies
Right.
while still maintaining the expectation of eventual return.
It definitely makes you think about those like difficult choices people would have to make in those situations.
Absolutely.
It's like a real life like ethical puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered escaping prison.
Right.
What other intriguing crimes fall under this category of crimes against public interest?
There's the concept of quasi-recidivism
Quasi-recidivism.
outlined in Article 160.
Okay.
Let's say someone commits a crime but hasn't started serving their sentence yet,
Right.
and then they commit another crime. Or imagine someone is already in prison serving time
Right.
and commits another crime while incarcerated.
Okay.
In these situations, the punishment for the second crime is significantly increased.
So it's like a legal double whammy.
You could say that.
You're already in trouble, and then you just dig yourself deeper.
Exactly.
It reflects the seriousness with which Philippine law views repeated offenses.
Absolutely.
It's about deterring criminal behavior.
Right.
And protecting society from those who consistently demonstrate disregard for the law.
For sure.
That makes it's a way to emphasize that actions have consequences.
Absolutely.
We've talked about escaping prison, committing new crimes while serving time.
Right.
What's next in our exploration of Philippine criminal law?
Now we're getting into the world of counterfeiting and falsifying documents.
Okay.
The distinctions between these offenses can be quite fascinating.
Right.
For example, forging the president's signature, as outlined in Article 161, is treated much more seriously
Right.
than simply falsifying a regular government document,
Okay.
which falls under Article 171.
So forging the president's signature carries like much heavier consequences.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Think about the symbolic weight of that signature.
Okay.
It represents the highest authority in the country.
Right.
Forging it is considered a direct attack on the government's legitimacy.
Oh, okay.
And therefore carries a heavier penalty.
Okay.
Falsifying other document,
Right.
while still illegal,
Yeah.
doesn't hold the same level of symbolic significance,
Right.
or potential for widespread damage.
So it's not just the act itself, but also the symbolic and potential impact it represents.
Exactly.
What about counterfeiting other things like money?
That's covered as well.
Okay.
Articles 163 to 167 delve into the various types of documents and instruments that can be counterfeited, including coins, treasury notes, and even foreign currency.
Okay.
Mutilation of coins is specifically addressed in Article 164.
Okay.
Interestingly, it's not simply defacing a coin that's a crime.
Okay.
The offender has to actually profit from removing metal from the coin.
So if you're like scratching your initials onto a coin, you're probably okay.
Probably.
But if you're like shaving off like bits of silver to sell, that's where you cross the line. It seems pretty specific.
It really emphasizes how seriously the law takes preserving the integrity of the currency system.
Okay.
Even small acts of counterfeiting can erode trust in the financial system.
Right.
So the law seeks to prevent even seemingly minor manipulations that could have broader consequences.
That makes sense. Trust is everything when it comes to money.
Absolutely.
We've covered forging signatures, counterfeiting money.
Right.
What about other ways someone might falsify a document?
Article 169 outlines various methods of forgery.
Okay.
It's not just about creating a fake document from scratch.
Right.
It can also involve altering an existing document,
Okay.
like changing numbers, erasing words, or replacing content to misrepresent information.
So it's all about manipulating information with the intent to deceive.
That's right.
But how is forgery different from falsification? They seem pretty similar.
That's a key distinction.
Okay.
While the terms might seem interchangeable,
Right.
legally speaking, there's a difference.
Okay.
Forgery usually involves imitating or creating a document to make it appear genuine,
Got it.
while falsification typically involves altering a real document.
Got it.
It's a subtle but important difference
Okay.
that affects how these crimes are defined and prosecuted.
It seems like the legal world is full of these subtle but important distinctions.
It really
We've covered crimes against those in authority, offenses, disrupting public order,
Right.
and acts against the public interest.
Absolutely.
What's left to explore in our deep dive into Philippine criminal law?
We've saved the most subjective and arguably most fascinating category for last: crimes against public morals.
Okay, now we're getting into the juicy stuff.
This is where the law grapples with behavior that's deemed offensive to societal norms and values.
What kind of actions are we talking about?
Article 200 deals with grave scandal.
Okay.
It's not simply causing a scene.
Okay.
The act has to be seriously offensive to standards of decency
Right.
and committed in a public place,
Right.
causing widespread shock and disapproval.
Okay.
It's about maintaining a certain level of decorum within society.
So what exactly defines something as seriously offensive to decency in the eyes of the law?
That's where things can get a bit complicated as interpretations can change.
Right.
Depending on the cultural context and evolving societal norms.
Right.
Generally speaking, it refers to acts that are blatantly immoral or indecent.
Okay.
Public nudity,
Yeah.
lewd behavior,
Yeah.
or actions deeply offensive to religious or cultural sensitivities.
Okay.
And of course, it all has to occur in a public space where it's likely to cause outrage or scandal.
I can see how this area of law could lead to some debate.
For sure.
It relies heavily on subjective interpretation.
Absolutely.
Which is bound to change over time and across different communities.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
What might be considered scandalous in one context or time period
Right.
might not even raise an eyebrow in another.
Yeah.
It highlights how the law has to adapt to changing social values.
It makes you wonder what kinds of acts might be considered grave scandal in the future.
Yeah.
What might be shocking today could be completely normal in a few years.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so grave scandal deals with offensive public acts.
Right.
What other crimes are considered crimes against public morals?
Article 201 tackles a range of content considered harmful to public morals.
Okay.
Immoral doctrines, obscene publications and exhibitions, and indecent shows.
Okay.
We're talking about glorifying criminals, showcasing excessive violence or pornography,
Okay.
and content that is offensive to specific races or religions.
It sounds like this article aims to to regulate what people can see and hear,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to content that could be considered harmful or offensive.
Right.
It's a lot of power for the law to hold.
It absolutely is, and it highlights the tension that often arises between freedom of expression and the desire to protect society from what's deemed harmful.
Right.
The text mentions historical cases
Yeah.
that have shaped how obscenity is interpreted in the Philippines.
Right.
Public perception and community standards play a significant role in determining what's considered obscene.
So context and evolving social norms really, really matter in these cases.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about how these laws will adapt
Right.
as technology continues to change and we're exposed to even more content from around the world.
Right.
Especially with the rise of the internet and social media.
Right.
Traditional notions of public space and community standards are constantly shifting.
It's a fascinating and evolving area of law.
Yeah.
Especially as we grapple with how to apply these concepts to the digital world.
Yeah.
What might be considered offensive or obscene online might differ from what's considered offensive or obscene in a physical public space.
This is getting really interesting. But before we get too deep into the philosophical implications, we need to wrap up this section.
Okay.
We'll continue our deep dive into Philippine criminal law after a quick break.
Sure.
Stay tuned. We're back and ready to wrap up our exploration of crimes against public morals in the Philippines.
Okay.
It's been fascinating to see how the law tries to navigate behavior and content that might be considered offensive.
Yeah.
Especially given how much those ideas change over time.
Absolutely. It really highlights that dynamic relationship between law and society.
Right.
What's considered morally acceptable or unacceptable is constantly evolving.
Right.
And the law has to adapt to those shifts.
Before we move on, I wanted to revisit something you mentioned earlier
Sure.
about historical cases shaping how the Philippines interprets obscenity.
Right.
Do you have any examples of how that played out in real life?
The text actually mentions a really interesting case involving postcards that depicted Filipino people in their traditional clothing.
Okay.
Now you might be thinking, what's so obscene about that?
Right. Yeah.
But back then, these images were considered quite controversial.
Yeah.
Some people saw them as inappropriate or exploitative.
Okay.
However, the court ultimately ruled that they weren't obscene because they weren't offensive to ideas of morality or decency,
Right.
and simply depicted people as they actually lived.
So even something as seemingly simple as a postcard could spark a debate about obscenity.
Absolutely.
It really shows how context and societal norms influence these interpretations.
Absolutely.
What might have been considered scandalous in the past might be completely commonplace today.
Exactly. And that's why this area of law is constantly evolving. What's offensive to public morals today might not be tomorrow. It's a fascinating area to study because it reflects how our values and our perspectives shift over time.
It makes you think about what future generations will consider offensive.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've covered grave scandal and the regulation of obscene content.
Right.
Anything else we need to explore in this deep dive?
The text briefly mentions a final category of crimes.
Okay.
Specifically related to public officers.
Okay.
But unfortunately, we don't have those details in our excerpts.
Right.
It's worth noting that Philippine law dedicates an entire section to offenses committed by those in positions of public trust.
Okay.
Things like corruption, bribery, and abuse of power.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all about holding those in power accountable.
Right.
And ensuring they don't misuse their authority.
Exactly. Those who are entrusted with public responsibilities have a higher duty to uphold the law and act in the best interests of the people they serve.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, challenging authority, disrupting public order, even pushing the boundaries of what's considered moral in Philippine society.
It's been quite a journey.
It's been fascinating to learn how Philippine law defines these acts, the specific elements required to be convicted of them,
Right.
and some of the surprising scenarios that highlight the the complexities of these crimes.
It's been a pleasure exploring these legal intricacies with you.
Yeah.
What stood out to you the most during our deep dive? Anything that surprised you about Philippine law?
I think what surprised me the most was the escape clause for prisoners during natural disasters.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing that you could legally break out of jail if there's an earthquake, as long as you come back within 48 hours.
48 hours.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does have a certain dramatic flair, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it speaks to the flexibility of the law in recognizing extreme situations.
Right.
And balancing competing interests.
Right.
In that scenario, the immediate need for survival
Right.
outweighs the need to maintain strict imprisonment.
It definitely highlights the difficult choices people would have to make in those situations.
For sure.
It also makes me wonder about the future of these laws.
Yeah.
Especially with the rapid advancement of technology.
Right.
We talked about how the law regulates obscene content.
Right.
But what about online activities that might, blur the lines of public disorder or spread misinformation? How will Philippine law adapt to these new challenges in the digital age?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And one that legal scholars and policymakers around the world are currently grappling with.
Yeah.
As the digital landscape expands. Traditional notions of public space, morality, and even authority are constantly being challenged.
Right.
It forces us to reconsider how we define these laws.
Yeah.
And how we enforce them.
Right.
It's a complex and ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds in the coming years.
Absolutely. It reminds us that the law isn't static.
Right.
It has to adapt and evolve to reflect the ever-changing world around us.
For sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into Philippine criminal law.
Yeah.
But before we go, we want to leave you with something to consider.
Right.
Think about that delicate balance between, safeguarding individual freedoms and maintaining order and safety within society.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that laws are both fair and effective in a world that's constantly changing? It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
As you continue your own exploration of law and society.
I agree.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
All right. So you wanted to know more about what kinds of crimes public officers can commit in the Philippines.
We're talking about the nitty-gritty here.
Yeah, the stuff that maybe you haven't thought of.
Exactly. We dug deep into the revised penal code for you.
Specifically Book 2.
Articles 204 to 245.
And let me tell you.
It was a real eye-opener, some of this stuff.
It's unbelievable, right?
Yeah. It's remarkable how many different ways someone in a position of authority could betray the public's trust.
I know, and we're not even talking about just like the obvious stuff like bribery.
Right.
There's so much more to it.
Definitely a lot more nuance than you might expect.
This deep dive uncovered some pretty wild detail.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, did you know that a judge can actually get in trouble for making a bad decision?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
I figured there had to be a catch.
Yeah, there are specific circumstances where that could happen.
Okay, so spill the tea. What's the deal with judges and bad decisions?
All right, so that's where Articles 204 and 205 come in. It's not enough for a judgment to be wrong.
Makes sense. There has to be more to it than that.
There has to be proof that the judge intentionally ruled unfairly.
Oh, so they have to be doing it on purpose.
Yeah, or that they were inexcusably negligent.
Inexcusably negligent? What does that even mean?
Basically, that they completely disregarded their duty to carefully consider the law and the evidence presented in the case.
So it's not just about making a mistake.
Right. It's about a serious breach of their responsibility as a judge.
And that whole good faith clause we saw, that seems like it could be a bit tricky.
It definitely can be.
How do you even prove if a judge was acting maliciously or not?
Well, you'd have to look at their reasoning for the decision.
Okay.
The evidence presented in the case.
Got it.
Any potential conflicts of interest.
Ah, so like if they had a personal stake in the outcome of the case.
Exactly.
Tricky stuff.
Yeah, it's a high bar to prove.
I bet. Speaking of tricky legal situations, we found that judges can also be penalized for delaying justice.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Ever feel like some cases just drag on forever?
Haha. Yeah, we've all been there.
This might be why.
That's what Article 207 is all about.
Okay.
If there's proof that a judge is deliberately stalling a case, they can be held accountable.
Really?
Yeah, it's about ensuring that the judicial process moves forward efficiently.
So there's actually a law against judges dragging their feet.
It's not quite as simple as that, but the law does address the issue of intentional delays.
Interesting. But then Article 208 flips the script, right?
How so?
Because it says that prosecutors can actually be charged for not pursuing criminals.
Ah, yes, that's an interesting counterpoint.
It's like this balancing act,
Right.
making sure that justice is served, but also served quickly.
Exactly. It highlights the tension between thoroughness and efficiency in the legal system.
You've got these two sides, each with their own responsibilities.
And the law is trying to make sure that everyone is doing their part to maintain a fair and efficient system.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You don't want someone getting away with something just because the wheels of justice are turning too slowly.
And at the same time, you don't want hasty prosecutions leading to wrongful convictions.
It's a tough balance.
It is, for sure.
We also found out that keeping secrets is a big deal when it comes to lawyers.
Oh, yeah. Attorney-client privilege is paramount.
Article 209 is all about attorneys protecting their clients' confidential information.
And for good reason.
It's actually a crime to reveal those secrets, even if no harm is done.
That's right. It's about maintaining trust and ensuring that clients can be completely open with their legal counsel.
Makes sense.
Without that guarantee of confidentiality, the whole legal system could break down.
People wouldn't feel comfortable sharing crucial information with their lawyers.
Exactly.
But hold on, there are limits to this privilege.
Right, absolutely.
Like, what if a client reveals they're planning a crime?
Right, that's a classic example.
The lawyer's not obligated to keep that secret, are they?
Correct. There are certain exceptions to attorney-client privilege.
So they could actually get in trouble for not reporting that information.
Potentially, yes.
That's a tough position for a lawyer to be in.
It is.
On the one hand, you have this duty to your client,
Right.
but on the other hand, you don't want to be complicit in a crime.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance.
Talk about an ethical dilemma.
For sure.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Sounds good.
Let's talk about bribery, which seems like a pretty straightforward crime, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
But the penal code actually breaks it down into two categories.
Oh, yeah.
Direct bribery and indirect bribery.
It gets complicated.
So what's the difference? What makes one direct and the other indirect?
Well, direct bribery, as defined in Article 210,
Okay.
involves a clear quid pro quo,
Quid pro quo meaning?
meaning something for something.
Okay.
It's about giving or receiving something of value,
What?
specifically to influence an official's actions.
So like a bribe in exchange for a specific favor.
Exactly.
What about indirect bribery then? How is that different?
Indirect bribery is a bit more nuanced.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Article 211 explains it as accepting gifts related to the person's position,
Interesting.
but not necessarily tied to a specific action.
So it's less about a clear exchange.
Right.
More about a conflict of interest.
Yeah, you could say that.
So like if someone gives a judge an expensive gift, even if there's no explicit request for a favor in return.
Exactly. It could still be considered indirect bribery.
Wow, that's interesting.
The lines can get blurry.
They certainly can. And then there's this whole concept of no frustrated stage in direct bribery.
Yes, that's a fascinating legal principle.
It almost sounds like a loophole to me.
Not quite a loophole, but it does have significant implications for how direct bribery is prosecuted.
Okay, break it down for me. What does no frustrated stage mean?
It means that with direct bribery, the crime is committed the moment the bribe is offered or accepted.
Really? Even if the intended outcome never happens?
Exactly, regardless of whether the intended outcome occurs.
Wow, so it's not about the result? It's about the intention.
Precisely.
So even if someone tries to bribe an official and it doesn't work, they can still get in trouble.
Yes, the mere act of offering or accepting the bribe is enough to constitute the crime.
That's wild.
The law views it as a serious offense,
I can see why.
regardless of whether the intended outcome was achieved.
Makes you think twice about offering anyone a brag, doesn't it?
I would certainly hope so.
And to make things even more interesting, we also uncovered something called qualified bribery.
Ah, yes, that's when things get really serious.
This seems like it takes bribery to a whole new level.
It does.
So what's the deal with qualified bribery? What makes it different from the other types of bribery?
Well, Article 211A
Oh.
deals with very specific instances of bribery,
Okay.
typically involving law enforcement.
Law enforcement, so like police officers.
Yes, or other officials responsible for upholding the law.
Interesting. So what kind of scenarios are we talking about here?
Think of a situation where an officer accepts a bribe to release a dangerous criminal.
Oh, wow.
Or to overlook crucial evidence in a case.
That's scary stuff.
It is.
It seems like the lawmakers were really trying to address the potential for corruption within law enforcement.
Absolutely. Qualified bribery highlights the gravity of that kind of betrayal of public trust.
And I'm guessing the penalties for qualified bribery are pretty severe.
They are significantly harsher than the other forms of bribery we discussed.
It makes sense, though, right?
It does.
When you're talking about people who are supposed to be upholding the law,
Right.
and they're the ones breaking it.
Exactly. It undermines the entire system of justice.
All right, so we've covered judges, lawyers, bribery.
Quite a range of potential offenses.
Let's move on to public funds, which, as we discovered, seem to be a very tempting target for some public officials.
It's unfortunate, but it's a reality we have to address.
Article 217 deals with malversation,
One of the most serious crimes a public officer can commit.
which is basically misusing public money, right?
Exactly. It's about using those funds for purposes other than what they were intended for. And we're not just talking about spending the money inappropriately.
Right, it goes beyond that.
The article states that even failing to account for public funds can be considered malversation.
That's correct. Transparency and accountability are key when it comes to public funds.
So it's not enough to just say, oops, I lost track of a few million pesos.
Not at all. Meticulous record-keeping is required.
Makes sense.
Every transaction needs to be justified.
So if an official can't explain where the money went, they're in trouble.
Absolutely. The burden of proof is on them to demonstrate that the funds were used appropriately.
That seems fair.
The law takes the handling of public funds very seriously.
As it should. But then we also have these related offenses like failure to render accounts
Right.
and technical malversation.
It can get a bit complicated, but essentially those are variations on the theme of misusing public funds.
Okay, help me understand the nuances here. What's the difference between those and straight-up malversation?
Well, Articles 218 and 219
Okay?
deal with failing to submit required financial reports.
So it's more about a lack of transparency.
Exactly. It's about obstructing the process of accountability.
What about technical malversation? What's that all about?
Technical malversation, as defined in Article 220,
Okay.
is when a public official uses funds for a purpose other than what they were originally allocated for.
Interesting. So it's not about personal gain.
Not necessarily, no.
It's about misusing the funds, even if they didn't personally profit from it.
Precisely.
That's a tricky one.
It is.
It might not seem as bad as outright stealing the money,
Right?
but it still represents a misuse of public funds,
Absolutely.
a violation of the public trust.
Exactly.
And then there's Article 221,
Which deals with...
failing to deliver funds as promised.
Yes, that's another way that public officials can misuse their authority over public resources.
This could apply to a situation where an official pledges money for a specific project,
Right.
but doesn't follow through.
Exactly. It's about broken promises and a lack of accountability.
So it's not just about how the money is used, but also about how it's managed and accounted for.
Precisely.
These articles collectively paint a pretty clear picture.
It's about transparency, responsibility, and accountability.
The law takes the handling of public funds very seriously.
It does, and for good reason.
It's mind-blowing how many different ways there are to get in trouble when it comes to money and power.
It's a potent combination, and the potential for abuse is always there.
But you know what else caught my attention?
What's that?
The fact that there are specific laws about prison escapes
Oh, yeah, those are pretty interesting.
and missing documents.
It's like something out of a movie.
I know, right? It's like a whole other world of potential crimes.
And they can have serious consequences, both for the individuals involved and for society as a whole.
So let's break it down. First up, prison escapes.
All right, so there are multiple ways for officials to abuse their authority over prisoners.
Okay, like what?
They could intentionally help a prisoner escape, which is covered under Article 223.
Wow, so a guard could intentionally leave a door unlocked or something?
That's one possibility, yes.
Or they could be negligent in their duties.
Right.
And allow an escape to occur, which is Article 224.
Exactly. It's about a failure to fulfill their responsibilities as custodians.
And what's interesting is that Article 225 even holds private citizens accountable.
In certain situations, yes.
If a prisoner escapes while under their care,
It's about extending the circle of responsibility.
so it's not just about the officials in charge of the prison.
No, it also applies to anyone who might be entrusted with the temporary custody of a prisoner.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
It highlights the seriousness of ensuring that prisoners remain in custody.
And it's not just about literal escapes either.
Right, there's more to it than that.
What else could be considered a form of escape under these laws?
Even letting a prisoner have special privileges at home could be considered a form of escape.
Really? Like letting them go home for the weekend or something?
It would depend on the specific circumstances, but yes, that could potentially fall under this law.
That's strict. So no home-cooked meals for good behavior.
Haha, not unless it's explicitly authorized and within the bounds of the law,
And then there's Article 226,
which deals with...
tampering with official documents.
Yes, that's another area where public officials can abuse their power.
What's the big deal about that? Why is it such a serious crime?
It goes beyond just destroying evidence.
Okay.
The law recognizes that even concealing or removing documents can erode public trust.
It's about maintaining the integrity of those records.
Exactly, and ensuring transparency in government operations.
So even if the documents aren't directly related to a specific case,
Right.
it's still a crime to tamper with them.
It is. The potential damage to public trust is significant.
It's about the bigger picture,
Absolutely.
upholding the law.
And maintaining public confidence in the government.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, and we're just getting started.
There's so much more to unpack in this deep dive into the revised penal code.
It's a fascinating journey through the intricacies of law and power,
Stay tuned for part 2.
where we'll explore even more ways that public officers can find themselves on the wrong side of the law.
You won't want to miss it.
Wow, it's amazing how much ground this section of the law covers. It really seems like the lawmakers tried to anticipate all the different ways that someone could abuse a position of power, you know?
I know it's true. And sometimes the specifics are just wild. Like, did you know that it's technically still illegal to challenge someone to a duel in the Philippines?
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a history book, right?
Exactly.
But it's right there in Article 260.
I can't believe it.
And it gets even weirder. Article 261 makes it a crime to mock someone for refusing a duel.
So I can't make fun of someone for not wanting to, like, sword fight at dawn?
No.
I mean, that's one law I can definitely get behind.
Right.
But seriously, it's fascinating to see these glimpses into a different era reflected in the legal code. What do you think?
I agree. I think it speaks to the enduring power of concepts like honor and reputation, even in a modern legal context.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And while we're on the topic of things that feel a bit outdated, let's talk about Article 262, which deals with mutilation.
Okay, this one sounds a bit intense.
It's certainly a serious crime, and it's not just about what you might initially think. Mutilation, as defined in the Penal Code, covers any act of intentionally depriving someone of a body part.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about, like,
It's not just about removing reproductive organs. It could be any body part. It's about causing permanent and significant physical harm to someone.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely broadens the scope. But speaking of specific types of harm, this next section of the Penal Code, dealing with crimes against chastity, really surprised me. I mean, there are several articles dedicated to these offenses.
Yeah, Articles 266 to 334 cover a wide range of offenses, reflecting societal concerns about sexual morality and consent.
It's definitely a complex and sensitive area of the law.
For sure.
I was really struck by how these laws reflect the cultural and historical context of the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that laws aren't just abstract rules. They're products of a specific time and place.
I agree. And while some of these laws might seem outdated by today's standards, it's important to remember that they represent an attempt to address serious issues of harm and abuse.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to remember.
Absolutely.
One thing that really stood out to me was Article 245, which deals with public officers making unwanted sexual advances. It just felt particularly relevant, given the current focus on issues of power and consent.
It's definitely a timely and important issue. This article highlights the potential for abuse when someone in a position of authority uses that power to exploit others.
It's a reminder that laws can be powerful tools for protecting vulnerable individuals and holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the recent legislation like the Safe Spaces Act, which further strengthens protections against sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence. It shows how the legal system is constantly evolving to address societal concerns and promote a safer and more equitable society.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how laws reflect changing societal values and priorities. And it highlights the importance of ongoing dialogue and advocacy to ensure that laws continue to evolve in a way that promotes justice and protects those most vulnerable.
Couldn't agree more.
So we've explored these very specific crimes related to sexual morality, but the penal code also delves into other types of offenses that might surprise you. For example, there's a section on crimes related to religious beliefs.
Yeah, Articles 132 and 133 deal with disrupting religious worship and offending religious feelings. It's interesting to see how the law grapples with the intersection of religious freedom and public order.
It makes sense, though, right? I mean, people's religious beliefs are deeply personal.
Yeah.
And it's understandable that the law would seek to protect those beliefs from being deliberately mocked or disrupted.
Absolutely. It's about respecting the diversity of beliefs in a society.
Right. So you can't just go around, like, interrupting a church service or making fun of someone's religious practices.
Note, there are limits to freedom of expression when it comes to potentially inciting violence or hatred based on religious beliefs.
It's about finding that balance between individual rights and the need for social harmony.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, but a necessary one.
But you know, it's not just about protecting religious beliefs. We also found articles dealing with crimes against civil status, like simulating births or hiding someone's true identity.
Yeah, Articles 347 to 352 cover a range of offenses that involve manipulating or falsifying someone's legal identity.
These crimes can have far-reaching consequences, right?
Absolutely.
Affecting everything from inheritance rights to voting privileges.
Exactly. Imagine being denied an inheritance because someone falsified a birth certificate or being unable to vote because your identity was stolen.
It's like those stories you hear about people assuming new identities to escape their past or commit fraud. You know?
Yeah, it happens more often than you might think. And the law is trying to prevent those types of scenarios by making it clear that these actions have serious legal ramifications.
Makes sense. It seems like they're trying to cover all the bases.
These articles highlight the importance of accurate and reliable civil status records. They're essential for maintaining order and accountability in society. And when someone intentionally manipulates these records, it undermines the integrity of the entire system.
Okay, so we've covered crimes against religious beliefs and crimes against civil status. What's next?
Well, this next section focuses on crimes committed by public officers related to their duties. And let me tell you, some of these were real eye-openers for me.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Articles 203 to 245 delve into a fascinating array of offenses. They highlight the specific ways that public officers can abuse their authority and betray the public trust. It's like a crash course in the potential pitfalls of power.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense. Let's start unpacking this. Where do we begin?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was Article 231, which deals with disobeying a superior. I mean, isn't that just part of working for someone? Following orders?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. It seems like a pretty basic part of any job.
Right, but it's not about blind obedience. It's about respecting the established chain of command and ensuring that the government functions effectively. This article addresses situations where a public officer deliberately and unjustifiably refuses to comply with a lawful order from their superior.
Okay, so there has to be a legitimate reason for the refusal. It can't just be about being a difficult employee.
Exactly. Imagine a police officer refusing to respond to a call, or a government official refusing to implement a crucial policy. It could have serious consequences.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. So it's not just about insubordination, it's about potentially disrupting the functioning of the government.
Precisely. And it's not just about disobeying orders either. We also found Article 233, which deals with refusing to take office after being elected or appointed. I mean, I can't imagine someone winning an election and then just saying, nah, I changed my mind.
Right, that seems pretty wild.
It might seem strange, but it does happen. This article ensures that those who are chosen to serve in public office actually fulfill their duties. It's about upholding the democratic process and ensuring that the will of the people is carried out.
Yeah, it makes sense. You can't just, like, back out after you've made a commitment to serve the public.
Exactly. And then there's Article 239, which tackles the issue of officials overstepping their bounds. You know, like that scene in a movie where the mayor tries to declare martial law or something.
Uh-huh, yeah, I can picture it now. So this article is about preventing those kinds of dramatic power grabs.
Well, it's not always that dramatic, but you're right. Article 239 deals with the usurpation of legislative powers. It's about preventing officials from taking on powers that they don't legally possess. It's crucial for maintaining the separation of powers and ensuring that each branch of government operates within its designated sphere of authority.
Okay, so it's like a legal game of red light, green light, but
Yeah.
with much higher consequences for those who cross the line.
Exactly. It's a safeguard against the concentration of power and ensures that the government remains accountable to the people.
Right, so no one branch of government can just decide to do whatever it wants. Checks and balances.
Precisely. And it's not just about overstepping within your own branch of government. We also have Articles 240 and 241, which address situations where officials from one branch try to interfere with the functions of another branch.
Oh, interesting. So like a judge trying to influence legislation or the president meddling in a court case?
That's right. Those articles deal with the usurpation of executive and judicial functions, respectively. It's about preventing, for example, an executive official from interfering with a court case or a judge from trying to dictate policy.
Okay, so no shady phone calls from mayor to the judge trying to influence a verdict.
Absolutely not. These articles are there to ensure that each branch of government can operate independently and without undue influence from other branches.
So, in a way, they're protecting the integrity of the entire system.
Exactly. And, it's not just about these blatant power grabs. We also found Article 244, which tackles those unlawful appointments where someone is nominated for a position they're clearly not qualified for.
Oh yeah, like that friend who gets promoted way beyond their capabilities. We've all seen it happen.
It's not just about incompetence, though. The key element here is that the offender has to know that the appointee lacks the necessary qualifications. It's about intentional wrongdoing, favoritism, or potentially even corruption.
So no more promoting your buddy schemes in the government.
Not if you want to stay on the right side of the law. Article 244 is designed to ensure that appointments are made based on merit and qualifications, not personal connections or political favors.
It's like a safeguard against the old boys club mentality in government.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many times that's happened in the past, though, right?
It's certainly a reminder that laws are constantly evolving to address the challenges of their time. And while we can't always prevent every instance of wrongdoing, having these laws in place is crucial for holding people accountable and promoting a fairer and more transparent system.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So as we've been going through all these different crimes, it's become clear that there's a lot more to it than just memorizing a bunch of legal terms. It's about understanding the context and the implications of these laws.
Exactly. It's about understanding the underlying principles, the historical context, and the real-world implications of these laws. It's about seeing how the law reflects societal values and priorities, and how it can be used to both protect individuals and promote the common good.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about learning the law. It's about gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves and the society we live in.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that the law is a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving to meet new challenges and reflect changing societal norms. And it's up to each of us to engage with the law, to understand its nuances, and to advocate for its just and equitable application.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of crimes public officers can commit in the Philippines. But there's still more to explore, including some fascinating cases and legal precedents that illustrate how these laws play out in real life. Stay with us as we continue our journey into the heart of the revised penal code. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the revised penal code of the Philippines, and we're still focusing on those crimes public officers can commit. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
It really has. From those very specific offenses to those broader concepts of abuse of power, it's been fascinating.
What stood out to me is how, some of these laws, like the one about dueling, give us a glimpse into the Philippines' history and culture, like a time capsule.
It's a reminder that laws aren't frozen in time, right? They evolve as society does.
But that evolution is where things get really interesting,
Oh, absolutely.
because then you have to deal with those gray areas
Exactly.
where the law might not have all the answers.
It's a constant challenge for legal systems everywhere.
It is. We talked about those ethical breaches, the things that might not be technically illegal, but still erode public trust.
Right, those are the tricky ones.
How do you hold people accountable for actions that might not break a specific law, but still just feel wrong?
It's a tough question,
It is.
and it highlights the importance of not just looking at the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law,
Yeah.
the ethical implications.
The bigger picture.
Exactly.
So it's not just about staying out of jail.
Right.
It's about upholding a higher standard.
Especially for those in positions of authority.
We've talked about judges, lawyers, bribery, mishandling those public funds, even prison escapes, and tampering with documents. It's amazing how many ways there are to abuse power.
It is, and it's not always these grand, obvious acts.
Right? Sometimes it's those subtle things, the things that fly under the radar.
Exactly.
But it's important to remember, these laws are not just about punishing the wrongdoers.
No, they're also about deterring future
It's
crimes.
about sending a message
That this kind of behavior won't be tolerated.
and promoting a culture of accountability
And transparency.
within the government.
Exactly.
It's like drawing a line in the sand.
Setting expectations.
And what I find really fascinating
What's that?
is how these individual laws all connect
Yeah.
to form this bigger picture.
It's like a puzzle, isn't it?
It is. Each article is a piece. And when you put them all together,
You start to see the values
the priorities.
of that society.
So for our listener out there who's been with us on this journey through the revised penal code, what's one key takeaway you hope they'll remember?
I hope they understand that laws are more than just rules.
Okay.
They're tools for shaping society.
That's a good way to put it.
They reflect our values, our fears, our hopes for a just world.
And engaging with those laws.
Questioning them, advocating for improvement.
That's all part of being an active citizen,
Absolutely.
not just blindly following.
But understanding and participating in the process.
So it's not about memorizing legal jargon,
It's about understanding how these laws impact us
how they shape our lives
and how we can use them.
to create a better society.
Well said.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have
Explored the ins and outs of the revised penal code.
uncovered some surprising facts
And hopefully sparked some curiosity.
in our listeners.
It's been a pleasure diving into this topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And I hope our listeners,
We'll continue exploring the world of law,
not with fear,
but with a sense of wonder.
and a desire to understand how it shapes the world around us.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those legal adventures going.